Physicists, philosophers, and theologians have pondered the meaning and nature of the universe for millennia. The idea that our universe could actually be just one of many or even an infinite number of universes is a very ancient one. Hindus, Buddhists, and the ancient Greeks are just some of the people who believed this concept. In this video, I'm going to look at how the multiverse theory could be scientifically possible, and 4 parallel universe encounters. Theoretical physicists have always considered variations of the multiverse as a possible explanation for some of the mysteries of physical laws and quantum mechanics. For example, it's been observed that particles can exist in more than one state simultaneously. Although the multiverse theory is not accepted by all, many influential and well-respected physicists do support it, including Isaac Newton, Albert Einstein, Brian Greene, Neil deGrasse Tyson, Lawrence Krauss, and Stephen Hawking. The multiverse theory has also been put forward as an explanation for the mysterious cold spot in space, first detected in 2004. This is an enormous cold spot in the cosmic microwave background, the radiation left over from the Big Bang. It is mostly equally distributed and a constant temperature everywhere else other than the cold spot. As there is not yet a full explanation for this using the standard model of physics, it has led some to believe it could be due to our universe colliding with a parallel world. This could be the first evidence to support the multiverse. Some multiverse theories, such as M theory and brain theory, rely on the existence of higher dimensions of reality. I want to show you this clip of Carl Sagan, who elegantly explains what it would be like to experience something from a higher dimension. It sounds spookily similar to many paranormal encounters.
Let's imagine that we are perfectly flat. I mean absolutely flat. And that we live, appropriately enough, in a flatland. A land designed and named by Edwin Abbott, a Shakespearean scholar who lived in Victorian England. Everybody in flatland is, of course, exceptionally flat. We have squares, circles, triangles, and we all scurry about, and we can go into our houses and do our flat business. Now, we have width and length, but no height at all. Now, these little cutouts have some little height, but let's ignore that. Let's imagine that these are absolutely flat. That being the case, we know, us flatlanders, about left-right, and we know about forward-back, but we have never heard of up-down. Let us imagine that into flatland, hovering above it, comes a strange three-dimensional creature which, oddly enough, looks like an apple. And the three-dimensional creature sees an attractive, congenial-looking square, watches it enter its house, and decides in a gesture of interdimensional amity to say hello. "Hello," says the three-dimensional creature. "How are you? I am a visitor from the third dimension." Well, the poor square looks around his closed house, sees no one there, and what's more, has witnessed a greeting coming from his insides, a voice from within. He surely is getting a little worried about his sanity. The three-dimensional creature is unhappy about being considered a psychological aberration, and so he descends to actually enter flatland. Now, a three-dimensional creature exists in flatland only partially. Only a plane, a cross-section through him can be seen. So when the three-dimensional creature first reaches flatland, it's only the points of contact which can be seen, and we'll represent that by stamping the apple in this ink pad and placing that image in flatland. And as the apple were to descend through, slither by flatland, we would progressively see higher and higher slices, which we can represent by cutting the apple. So the square as time goes on, sees a set of objects mysteriously appear from nowhere and inside a closed room and change their shape dramatically. His only conclusion could be that he's gone bonkers. Well, the apple might be a little annoyed at this conclusion, and so, not such a friendly gesture from dimension to dimension, makes a contact with the square from below and sends our flat creature fluttering and spinning above flatland. At first, the square has no idea what's happening. He's terribly confused. This is utterly outside his experience. But after a while, he comes to realize that he is seeing inside closed rooms in flatland. He is looking inside his fellow flat creatures. He is seeing flatland from a perspective no one has ever seen it before, to his knowledge. Getting into another dimension provides as an incidental benefit a kind of X-ray vision. Now our flat creature slowly descends to the surface, and his friends rush up to see him. From their point of view, he has mysteriously appeared from nowhere. He hasn't walked from somewhere else. He's come from some other place. They say, "For heaven's sake, what's happened to you?" And the poor square has to say, "Well, I was in some other mystic dimension called up." And they will pat him on his side and comfort him, or else they'll ask, "Well, show us, where is that third dimension? Point to it." And the poor square will be unable to comply.
Now we've looked at the possibility of parallel universes and dimensions, I'm going to share 4 possible encounters with parallel worlds. Carol Chase McElheney. Carol Chase McElheney's family has a long history in the Californian city of Riverside going back to the 1800s. Her grandparents, aunt and uncle, had once lived there as neighbours, so she had been visiting the city her entire life and lived there herself for a while after finishing college. In other words, she knew this place very well. Whilst driving from a dog show in nearby Perez, Carol decided to take a detour to Riverside and visit her grandparents' grave and her old home. As soon as she arrived at Riverside, she got an eerie feeling that something wasn't quite right. She continued driving through the streets and noticed that the housing did not look at all familiar. She couldn't locate the house she had lived in after college either. She decided to drive to her grandparents' house, but this road was also entirely different. There were no tall trees or anything familiar to Carol at all. Just small ranch houses completely different from the large Tudor homes her family had lived in. Completely stumped, Carol then drove to the cemetery but found this also did not exist. It was now a fenced-off area full of weeds with no driveway or gate. She continued to drive around and got to University Avenue, which was once a well-kept area full of restaurants and hotels. Now it was a dilapidated and run-down place full of graffiti and what Carol described as scary-looking people. She also looked for the Mission Inn Hotel, but it wasn't there either. She was too frightened to ask for directions and also had a strange feeling that something bad would happen if she spoke to anyone here, as she was now convinced that this was a darker parallel version of Riverside. I know you're probably thinking that there's an easy explanation for this, and that Carol was maybe lost or that things could have just drastically changed in the town. She claims this isn't possible, as she did recognise the college and school, so this indicates that she wasn't lost. Her cousin also confirmed that the old family homes were still there and couldn't explain what Carol saw. Also, her father sadly died a couple of years later and wanted to be buried in the Riverside Cemetery. When Carol arrived at Riverside, the cemetery, University Avenue and the Mission Inn were all there exactly as she had originally remembered. Lorena Garcia. This case reminds me of an extreme example of the Mandela Effect. This is when a number of people remember world events or even simple things such as brand names in a different way than they are. It became a popular topic after the death of Nelson Mandela in 2013. Many people claim to remember Nelson Mandela dying in prison in the 1980s. After this point, people began noticing other things that were not how they had remembered them, and it became known as the Mandela Effect. One leading explanation for this is that we are all accessing parallel realities where the events did happen differently, as we remembered. Back in 2008, way before this was popularised, Lorena Garcia was about to experience this in quite a dramatic way. She posted her story on a Spanish website called Tendacious21. She claims to have woken up one day and first noticed that her bedsheets were different from the night before. She arrived at work and could not find her office. She still worked in the building but was now on a different floor and her boss was a different person. She was so scared that she decided to go home sick. She then could find no trace of the man she had been dating for several months and was instead still dating her ex-boyfriend. She went for medical and psychological testing, but they could not find anything wrong. The psychologist concluded that she must be suffering from stress-induced hallucinations, but Lorena disagrees. She claims to have memories like her sister breaking her arm on holiday that her family now say did not happen. So is this an extreme example of the Mandela Effect, or did Lorena have a mental break? The man from Taured. In July of 1954, a mysterious businessman arrived at Tokyo International Airport. He handed his passport over to be stamped when border control noticed something wrong with his passport. It looked authentic but was issued from a country called Taured. No country called Taured has ever existed. The man was described as Caucasian with a beard and spoke French as his first language, but could also partly speak Japanese and other languages. The immigration officers immediately took him in for questioning, but the man remained adamant that he was from a country called Taured, which was located between France and Spain and had existed for 1,000 years. One of the frustrated officers eventually got a map and asked the man to pinpoint Taured. The man pointed to Andorra, an independent principality in the Pyrenees Mountains. He could not understand why Andorra was not called Taured. The immigration officers decided to detain the man and put him in a guarded hotel room for the night, so they could further question him the next day and decide what to do. The story goes that the man and all of his possessions completely vanished from the hotel room, despite guards being present outside the door. The police were called to look for the man, but he was never seen again. Pedro Ramirez. Late in the evening of November 9th, 1986, Pedro Ramirez was travelling from Seville to Alcalá de Guadira in Spain, where he had a temporary residence. This journey was a regular work trip for Pedro, who was an industrial expert and engineer. As he took a left turn, he suddenly found himself on an unfamiliar six-laned road. He did not recognise any of the buildings or surroundings on either side of the road. The other cars on the road all appeared to be white or beige old-fashioned Cadillacs with an unfamiliar style of licence plate. He continued driving down the strange road, trying to figure out where he was. Eventually, he was able to take another left turn, and he noticed the landscape had changed dramatically and looked more familiar. He came to a sign pointing the way to Alcabala, Malaga and Seville. He decided to return to Seville, which was at least familiar to him, and try to work out what he'd just seen. However, after 30 minutes of driving in the direction of Seville, he somehow ended up at Alcalá de Guadira. He never saw the mysterious road again and could not find it on any maps. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe if you'd like to see more, and thank you to any new subscribers, and see you in the next Mystery Sphere video.